Good afternoon, everyone. These are the committee meetings for the Bellingham City Council. This is March 13th, 2023, and I'm subbing in for President Michael Lillquist, who is at a conference. So please go easy on me. It's been a little while. I have been a president before, but it's been several years, so it's going to take me a little bit to catch up here. Our first committee meeting this afternoon is Community and Economic Development, and that is chaired by Councilmember Holly Huffman.
Thank you. Today, for Community and Economic Development Committee, I'm joined by Council Members Stone and Martins. We have one agenda item, and that is the 2023-2027 Consolidated Plan Process. The 2023-2027 Consolidated Plan is required by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, which identifies community needs and priorities to be funded by the Federal Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, and Home Investment Partnership Program over a 5-year period. The city uses this planning process to identify priorities for its local housing levy, affordable housing sales tax, and general fund expenditures. Staff will present the assessment of fair housing, community participation process, proposed strategic plan, and proposed annual action plan over 3 to 4 committee meetings. Adoption by the City Council is anticipated in May 2023. And here to present the discussion, I have Samuel Lutz from the Community and Planning and Community Development.
Thank you, Councilmember Huffman. Yes, Samuel Lutz. I'm the Housing and Services Program Manager in the Planning Department, and I'm here with my colleague Kate Bartholomew to present to you today. As mentioned, this is the first of several meetings where we'll be discussing the consolidated planning process. And we're going to really focus today on sort of the public participation aspects of that, as well as the data assessment that has been going on since about a year ago. And then we'll be coming back to you to dive into the specific goals and strategies at future meetings. We'd also love to hear from you today if you have any specific comments or things you'd like for us to be bringing back to you in the coming weeks. So the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, which I'll refer to as HUD, requires us to do this consolidated planning process as a condition of HUD funding. We get funding through 2 programs, as you mentioned, the Community Development Block Grant Program and the Home Investment Partnership Program. And Bellingham chooses to incorporate our local funds into this process as well, because we feel like it's a way of being transparent and incorporating broad public input into the whole process. So what is a consolidated plan? Just a little pop quiz for you on this Monday morning. Is it A, a plan due to HUD every 5 years required of all entitlement communities? B, a formal way to assess community needs? C, a formal way to gather community feedback? D, the city's stated goals and funding priorities to assist low-income residents? Or E, all of the above? Of course, it's letter E, all of the above, and it's really a way of demonstrating our understanding of data and the qualitative public input that we've received over the past year. So we were here over a year ago to talk with you about the Community Participation Plan, which lays the groundwork for the how we go about doing this process. You approved that back in February, and we came back to you in the spring for our annual action plan process. A reminder that the HUD program year runs from July 1st through June 30th. So the year that we're in right now is the last year of our current 5-year consolidated plan. And today we're focusing on the plan that will begin on July 1st. So this is another way of looking at that process. We've been actively engaged in seeking public input and public engagement for about a year. And right now we're in sort of the more formal stage of that process. Our formal public comment period is open through the end of March. And we had a public hearing at the Community Development Advisory Board meeting last week, and then we'll be moving into the finalization and adoption. So now going into the assessment of fair housing particularly. Congress passed the Fair Housing Act in 1968 as a way to prevent discrimination in housing. Since that time, there have been various expectations of how local government is expected to affirmatively further fair housing. Right now, there's a draft federal rule that is out that will require us to submit our assessment of fair housing to HUD and get it approved. But right now, it's really left in the hands of local government to affirmatively further fair housing. We chose to continue the process that was started under the Obama administration and did submit our fair housing plan to HUD and got some voluntary feedback from them. And that new federal rule is expected to be finalized in the coming months. So under federal law, it's illegal to discriminate against people based on these specific protected classes. We also have additional protected classes under state and local law, and those include things like protection against sexual orientation and gender identity, prevention of discrimination against source of income, against age discrimination. So all of those are folded into the assessment of fair housing. It's really focused on discrimination based on protected classes. And the biggest complaints we typically hear about when we go into the public are based on source of income discrimination and also disability. So the assessment of fair housing is a very important contributor to the overall consolidated planning process. Even though it's a different plan, it's an important foundation for the whole consolidated planning process. And all of these 3 documents you see up here are on our website. I do have some extra printed copies of this consolidated plan overview, which is the shortest of the documents. The middle one is our full draft consolidated plan that will be finalized and submitted to HUD. So based on what we hear from the public, all of these plans are broadly about kind of fairness and affordable housing and our efforts to contribute to helping low-income residents of the community. So when we go out and do our public engagement, we found that it's helpful to just focus on protected class discrimination, but also on all of these issues at the same time, because that's what people want to talk about. They don't see fair housing as different from fairness in general when it comes to the struggles that we have with housing in our community. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate now, who's going to talk about those public engagement processes as well as the data assessment.
Good morning. Is my mic on? Is the mic on? Hello? Okay. I'm going to speak to you very briefly about the community engagement process and the results of that, and also the results of the data analysis. As Sammy mentioned, there's very much more detail in both of the full written plans if you'd like to learn more. So generally, we did a few things different this time around. Some of our guiding principles were that we really wanted to coordinate as much as possible with other city departments who are also coming forward to the public with plans. Especially this spring and last fall, there were a lot of community plans. So anytime we could come to different events, some of which are pictured there, with several different community departments where people could give input on various plans, we found that really helpful instead of trying to kind of overburden our stakeholders with lots of surveys and lots of events. We also wanted to go to people rather than having, in the past, we've had open houses or meetings at City Hall or on city property asking people to come to us or come and respond to surveys. We really tried to include a lot of staff going out into the community in appropriate places to engage with folks where they live or where they already recreate. We had a lot more language accessibility. We had interpreters with me at some of these events, and all of our surveys translated into Spanish especially. And that outreach was really iterative. When we put up an initial equity survey, we noticed that there were some gaps in who we had heard from. Some groups were underrepresented, such as low-income renters and young people. So we, for example, went out to Western Washington University and tried to really target those groups. So it was an ongoing process. And again, the survey results are not scientific. They're opinion-based surveys. So whoever wants to respond, responds. But we find them helpful. So here's a quick overview of just the public participation to date. It really came in many different forms, from listening sessions in person at places like the Bellingham Housing Authority or Western Washington University. Also surveys that were targeted to specific groups, such as parents and families through the school district. They sent out a survey for us, as well as professionals who work with a lot of low-income folks, so trying to get more of their perspective from what they see at that level. I also kind of embedded myself through that manufactured home park process when we were doing outreach to manufactured home park residents, so that I came along to some of those meetings and tried to get input from manufactured home park residents who we hadn't heard from a lot in the past. So anywhere there was some kind of overlap with this plan over the last year and a half, we tried to make an appropriate outreach. And of course, our online engagement has been going on throughout. So this survey is, I know it's hard to read all the categories, but they include all of the protected classes that Samia mentioned earlier, plus ones that are specifically protected in Bellingham or in Washington. And this is a survey of housing professionals that work with low-income renters, such as attorneys, case managers, et cetera. And when we asked our public in general if they had faced discrimination, those reporting discrimination were a pretty small percentage. But when we asked professionals who work with many, many low-income renters, we saw extremely high percentage had reported at least one client they'd work with had especially experienced source of income discrimination, or and also a very kind of alarmingly high percentage because of race or skin color or disability or a request for accommodation.
Sorry, just a clarifying question. Is this Bellingham, Whatcom County, or Washington State?
Thanks for clarifying. This is Bellingham specific professionals. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I did in my survey say, have your clients in Bellingham experienced this, but some of the professionals we surveyed also work probably in Whatcom County as well, but so probably some overlap with Whatcom County. So some key quotes that we heard from these professionals. Sorry, this isn't working out, but we need more intensive mental health services. Advocates and light touch case managers are not equipped to handle the level of needs that exist today. And that the priority should be educating landlords about fair housing. While it's important for tenants to know their rights, often they don't access assistance till really the harm has been done. That was something we heard. These are quotes we heard from multiple people. That tenant protections from the eviction moratorium under the COVID-19 pandemic actually seem to have made landlords more nervous about who they choose to rent to. And there was some concern from professionals that adding protections might make landlords even more cautious against renting to tenants that have barriers, such as rental assistance or poor history of credit, et cetera. Others stated there's lots of laws, they need to be enforced. So enforcement was a key message we heard many times, and that there's already a lot of regulation, and it makes it very difficult to manage. So maybe doing more to reduce that would also help. So that's what we heard from professionals. Now from the public in general, we heard, these aren't quotes, they're just themes that surfaced from many folks in the public. And we altogether surveyed over 400 members of the public, so pretty good percentage of sample size there. So higher taxes on landlords and developers was common. Some folks said lower taxes in general. There's a lot of, obviously, contradiction between some of our comments. That instituting a cap on rents and rents control is always a popular comment we hear. More homes, condos, et cetera, for ownership rather than only rental. Many comments about more density. Others who were concerned about services going to people who aren't from the area. Lots of interest in more publicly or cooperatively owned housing or manufactured home parks. And also, of course, those who want to eliminate parking requirements and those who do not want to eliminate parking requirements. So those are some big themes. Just to sum up the takeaways, that discrimination is happening in Bellingham. And we still need to really keep our eye on providing education, especially landlords and property managers. We need to focus on incentives and enforcing rules that already exist, something we heard a lot. The affordable housing is just needed in general throughout the city, and any new unit will help, something we heard from a lot of providers. It's kind of like, why are you asking me these questions? Just build more housing, kind of came up a lot. And then also just something we heard from actually quite a surprising number of people in very different stakeholder groups was this issue of, because of the severe housing shortage, that tenants feared reporting any maintenance issues or substandard housing conditions for fear of losing their housing or the rent increasing, which obviously puts us in a difficult position to do enforcement if we don't know about a problem, but it actually came up quite a bit. Our data analysis. The first step in the consolidated plan process is really to analyze the data available to us and see where there are discrepancies and disproportionate needs among those protected classes that we described earlier. And I've tried to note the data sources when possible, but just want to let you know in general, some of these data sources are quite old, but we still feel like they're the best available source. So first, HUD asks a lot of questions about what they call disproportionate areas of racially or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, and their threshold for that is quite high, like 50% of a census tract being in poverty and of one race or ethnicity. We don't have any concentration of poverty that reaches that threshold in Bellingham, but we did want to take some time to still try and dig into the data anyway and see what it would tell us. One important thing to note is that our younger population and families with children are much more diverse than our population as a whole of Bellingham. So when we use school district data, we do see there are areas in our city where the percentage of non-white elementary students is much higher than other areas. And I think what surprised me even more was some areas where it's very, very low. Almost all the students are white. So we do see some concentration by race and ethnicity. Another way we decided to look at this was to kind of use our own local threshold and look for areas where there was an overlap of above average rate of poverty and percent of non-white households. So looking at the last decade, you can see that there's been a pretty steady percentage of households that are below the poverty level. That's the pink line at the top. It's been about 21% for the last decade. And then there's also a pretty steady percentage of non-white households, which is the blue line, although it has increased a little bit, but around 12% over the last decade. We map that out, we actually see that there are areas where there's more concentration, meaning that both the census tract had above average percentage of households who were living in poverty and non-white. So that's kind of the information that HUD is really interested in, I guess. And you can tell by this analysis that even though the overall percentages aren't increasing, we perhaps are seeing areas becoming more densely populated with folks who are living in poverty and also are of a minority group. So that's somewhat interesting. I will say the color doesn't really match the number of people. It's just the whole census tract is colored in if that threshold is met. So do keep that in mind. But it is interesting to see that in 2010, that was only city center, and now we have several neighborhoods where that would apply. Of course, Western Washington University being kind of, that makes sense. But the others were somewhat interesting. So some other data that we found sort of stark, I guess, is looking at the median family income for families with children. Now, these numbers are the median income for only households with children. And we can see that those with a female head of household, single female head of household, are almost a third of those in a married couple family. So obviously, two people have the potential to have two incomes, and therefore, on average, or the median would tend to be higher. But obviously, we see single female households are not the same as single male-headed households with children. So there's some definite gender disparity as well. This particular set of data also surprised me a bit. We see a very stark difference between the median household income for Asian or white households, for example, compared to Native American, Pacific Islander, or multiracial households. So this is the median household income by race or ethnicity. And quite a disparity there. And I do apologize, I made some changes to the way this was presented in your packet, but I feel like this is a bit easier to read, especially for those maybe just seeing this for the first time. But the percentage of Bellingham households by race and ethnicity is the dark blue lines, and the percentage of only low-income households, those earning below 50%, is the light blue. I've removed the white non-Hispanic households because they make up 87.5% of all households in Bellingham and 79% of low-income households. So that kind of really makes it impossible to see the smaller differences in these other racial or ethnic groups, but I do think it's important data to zero in on. So, for example, even though Black and non-Hispanic households make up just 0.6% of all households in Bellingham, they make up 1.3% of all low-income households, which is double. And we see that same trend. We see double the representation of non-white and Hispanic households in our lower income population. So that shows that if we do look carefully enough, we do see we have a disproportionate number of our low income households are Hispanic or Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Cost burden, which I think you're familiar with, is really our best indicator of the extent that the population is lacking affordable housing. We consider a house paying more than 30% of their income as cost burden, and a household paying more than 50% of their income as severely cost burdened. And I just wanted to take a moment to compare Bellingham to some other places. So we see 41% in total of Bellingham households are paying over, or are cost burdened or severely cost burdened. Compared to Washington State, that's only 30% of households that are cost burdened. And I also included King County on here because I think it's a good example because King County has the highest housing costs. So it's not really about housing costs, it's the disparity between housing costs and income. And in Whatcom County, this is Bellingham. Bellingham, our housing costs are high relatively while our incomes are low. And so we have a very high percentage of cost burden households. Also, being a college town and having a big portion of our population being young people and students does tend to, I believe, increase the cost burden. But if we look at renter cost burden by household type, we also see that this is a problem not just for other types, our college students or that type of population. When you're looking at families with children and elderly families, we see that 68% of elderly non-family households renter households are cost burdened. So that's a very high percentage of our elderly folks who are renting, as well as other small and large families with children who rent are also extremely cost burdened. So I do think I've spent more time in this most recent plan looking at just trying to disaggregate the cost burden data by group and just see how extremely different it is when you compare renters versus owners, for example. You don't need, this is a busy graph, but you don't need to see all the numbers here in particular, but the table is an example of many that you will find through the consolidated plan and the assessment of fair housing. It shows both renter and owner households broken down by race, ethnicity, and income level. The row at the bottom is the average for each income level for the city as a whole, and any highlighted cell shows where there's a disproportionately high number of households that in that category who have a housing problem, which in most cases is cost burden. So there are quite a few. If it's considered disproportionately high if there's 10 plus percentage points greater than the category as a whole. So this is a very disaggregated table, but you'll see many like it in our analysis. And finally, we include this last slide because it illustrates how the data will impact and how we prioritize our goals and strategies in the assessment of fair housing and consolidated plan. So at the extreme end of our cost burden scale, we see households who become homeless. So this is a graph of households who are actually applying to the housing pool in Whatcom County. This is Whatcom County data, not just Bellingham, but so are literally homeless at the time of applying. We see an overall trend of increasing number of households becoming homeless and applying for services. But if we disaggregate that, some of the biggest increases are among families with children, households fleeing domestic violence, seniors, and veterans. And while the larger groups might be fleeing DV and families with kids, those have sort of been steadily increasing over the last 5 years. But if you look at seniors and veterans, it's also something interesting is happening there because they were on a downward trajectory, but then between 2021 and 2022, we saw senior households applying to the housing pool increase by 167%. Veteran households increase by 90%. So it's not the trend we'd like to see, but that is what our data analysis tells us. And I'll hand it back to Samia.
Thanks, Kate. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to read through these goals or strategies from the assessment of fair housing. These are all things that you're very familiar with. They have to do with a lot of your conversations around housing that go beyond just our small community development housing division here. But we're looking at these things particularly through the eyes of disproportionality. So when we think about missing middle housing or increased inventory in the city, we're really looking at how to reduce those impediments to fair housing in this plan. I will say that, as is crystal clear, there are way more needs than there is ability for us to attend to those needs. But we will be coming back to you with our goals and strategies and talking through those. It's critical because that's how we prioritize our funding. So we have a very generous public. We do have money that you'll see being allocated through these plans, and unfortunately we cannot give money to every ask and every place that it's needed, and so we have to use this planning process to prioritize, and so that's what we're looking to you to help us do. As we said, all of these plans are available on the website. The public comment period formally is open through the end of this month, and we'll be coming back to you to keep this conversation going. Thank you. You can turn it off.
Thank you, Samia and Kate, for that introduction to the consolidated plan work. And again, there will be several more meetings following this with more information. Are there any comments or questions from committee members? Councilmember Martins?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to have a lot of questions, but out the gate, can anyone in the planning department touch on an article that was in the Herald about the funding cliff coming for us for Whatcom Homeless Services essentially June of this year? And are we thinking and discussing that in step with this current consolidated plan process?
Yeah, that was referring to the Treasury funds that have been dispersed through the Opportunity Council, the just millions of dollars in rent assistance that have been going out in our community. And yes, we're very much in dialogue with the county about that and the use of funds for rental assistance. And yes, that's absolutely a part of the process.
Councilmember Stone?
So I understand that you'll be coming back, but I think what was highlighted by the presentation about the disproportionality, unfortunately to me, is not surprising, but I'm happy to see the data there to support it because I'm hopeful that having that data in hand will push the city to do more to sort of bridge those gaps and focus the work on areas that are disproportionately, disadvantaged or impacted. Especially when it comes to housing, because that's such a basic need, right, above all else. And so when I think about when we've done assessments about like the parks, right, within the city and looking at the city as a whole and where are we deficient. I think this shines some bright lights on areas where I'm hopeful that we will focus going forward. So really just a comment.
Councilmember Martins.
Thank you. In the beautiful, wonderful, short PDF about this current draft plan, there's two great graphs that essentially 72% of households in Bellingham are one or two person households, but 79% of our housing stock are 2 or more bedroom, with 3 or more bedrooms being 45% of our current housing stock. At any given point in time, can we have a conversation if it's more fiscally responsible to try to convert oversized homes in our community to fit these needs? Would it be more efficient? Would we be able to get housing much faster? Or is it that we just keep building from the ground up and that's kind of our only solution? And I know there's probably not an answer right now and wasn't expecting one, but would love it if that can be a conversation at some point. All right, this probably my last one for right now. Over and over again, we see the desire to have education for landlords. And I know that I have been speaking about this, I think, since the beginning of the year, and it is going through other conversations and other presentations we get from the planning department. But again, instead of educating, how do we actually enforce the rules on the books to a certain degree? I don't think we need more regulation as it currently stands, because we have, unfortunately, so many things that are on the books but we're not able to enforce. And I know I say that all the time in specific planning discussions, but can we have that discussion with the consolidated plan and process as well? Thank you.
Great questions. Councilmember Stone.
So I guess following up on Councilmember Martin's last comment, maybe dovetailing a little bit, but the focus on some of the takeaways that were highlighted in the presentation about the discrimination that we know is happening, especially with respect to and concerns about the tenants in the community, and especially when we're looking at the percentage of residents who are tenants, right, in a rental situation. It seems that repeatedly as a city, we're focusing on sort of education and conversations with the landlords or with the, who are managing those developments. But I feel like at some point needing to focus again on that shift towards supporting and, educating tenants as far as their rights, and if there's any way through that enforcement for the city to be sort of the intermediary to reduce that fear. Because the concern that I have is, one, again, rental units that are in our community that aren't currently in our pool that we're tracking and following up on, and similarly the concerns about just the housing conditions as well as rental issues. But so again, actively, I guess, providing that support to tenants directly.
Thank you, Councilmember Stone. That's definitely touches on the points that stuck out to me among all of this wonderful information. But the enforcing the rules that already exist and the avenue for reporting that reduces fear seem to overlap with a lot of the conversations that we're having regarding renter protections. And I think diving a little bit more into that definitely overlaps with the work we've asked staff to do regarding ordinances and code that other cities have adopted regarding renter protections. It seems like a really wonderful piece of work, this survey, the qualitative and quantitative data that's been collected. It sounds like it'll be useful in many areas. So I really appreciate all the work that's been put into that for the help in directing our policy going forward. We are running on time, but Councilmember Martins?
Last one, I swear, and this is just a dream. Slide 21 was median family income for families with children, and as no surprise, I think for our country, women have always been thought of as less than and valued less. On that horribly disparate number between women and everyone else, can we work with the SBDC to see if we can't, and that's not anything that would happen overnight, but see if we can't collaboratively come up with ways to give women or female households specifically help them understand how to advocate for themselves and give them more support to do so. Because then, as was highlighted between us and I think King County, even though they're the most expensive, we're still outpacing how much it takes to live here when adjusting for what people are actually paid. If we could help support female households, in specifically, that might help bring up the bottom end as well.
What was the organization that you cited, the acronym?
SBDC, the Small Business Development, with CJ Seitz, who gave a great presentation a couple weeks ago.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stone.
Okay, last one. I know that the chair is going to. I feel like every item on the agenda today does not have enough time allotted, so it might be a long day. But thank you for the time. Just again on this front, I'm just concerned. I know that we've talked about that every unit, right, being added to the supply here is valued and needed. But at the same time, I feel like these slides, it's just echoing again the fact that at the market rate, if things are unaffordable, and even looking at the, the cost burden and how extreme that is for so many of the residents in Bellingham, just again, requesting from the planning department to be bringing forward things that we can do as a city proactively to support permanently affordable housing. And again, when you talk about affordability, it's like, well, affordable for whom? Obviously, that requires further discussion as well. But beyond HUD, I guess, are there things that we as a city can do proactively to address those? So, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much for the presentation. Look forward to the following presentations in the next couple months. And with that, end of committee.
Thank you, Councilmember Huffman. Our next committee is Parks and Recreation, and that is chaired by...
We'll need to pause in between, so if we could get a couple minutes. We could reconvene at 1:40, hopefully, about maybe 3 minutes.
1:40? Okay.